Welcome to the third instalment of Travel Retail Question Time, a unique series kindly sponsored by Nestlé International Travel Retail, which allows viewers to submit their questions to an eminent member of the duty-free and travel retail industry. This episode, James Prescott, Managing Director at Harding Retail, is in the hot seat. Just as a reminder, the questions submitted are shortlisted and then put to James, and that's the format of how Travel Retail Question Time works. TRBusiness has no influence on the questions that are put to the interviewee. James, are you ready to receive your first question? Okay, let's kick off. So, what advice would you give to a brand looking at entering the cruise channel, and what do they really need to consider before committing to this business?
It's an interesting one. I've been talking to a lot of people this week about brands coming into the cruise channel because it is different to airports, and Cannes has traditionally been quite an airport-based business because I guess the industry is largely an airport-based business. The cruise channel in terms of retail is still circa 1.5 billion in revenue, so it's a much smaller part of the business, but it's growing fast. There are 100 plus new ships coming, and those ships are coming into new markets, so we do need different brands that are part of it. And the analogy I try and give is thinking of a ship more like a hotel than an airport, because, and in a good way, if you were inside a hotel and you were there for 7 or 8 days, what sort of retail offer would you want? It would be very different to an airport. So you want products that are engaging, that it's not so much about price, although that can be important depending on the cruise line, but it's more about what they add to the experience of being on the ship. So I'd say put yourself in the mind of the guests, and they are guests rather than kind of shoppers on a ship. Put yourself in the place of them and imagine if you were on that ship in that hotel for a week, what sort of product and experience would you want? And if your product's got something that you think really can add value, then I think that's a good start. And a few of the brands I've seen this week have been really phenomenal in that regard, and I won't mention specifically who they are because I hope we can bring them to market first, but brands that aren't just about products on the shelf at a price, brands which can integrate and embed themselves more with the whole cruise experience. So whether it's food and beverage or in cabin, or taking the product out of the confines of the shop, because shops on ships, by the nature of the ships being very constrained, can be smaller and more limited. So I would say when you come to present the brands, or if you're interested, kind of almost part the commercials to start with and just say, has the brand got something? Can I bring and offer something that adds value to a guest on a ship for a week? And I think the hotel analogy is a useful one in that regard.
Do you believe, just as a follow-up to that, in terms of the mechanics of the cruise channel, probably a lot of suppliers are used to going into the airports first or on the airlines first. Do you think that there is more of a learning curve, as it were?
There is, and we're trying increasingly to find products which not necessarily aren't in airports, but almost a brand coming to us and saying, well, I'm already listed in X, Y, and Z airports, therefore, kind of put me on one of those ships. It doesn't really hold water. And Cannes I love Cannes as a show because it's inspiring, from seeing not just the products that are coming, but how they're displayed and talking to the people. But the product categories that have existed in airports traditionally aren't necessarily the product categories which are the most important on ships. It's fine jewellery, it's watches, it's luxury and accessories, which you do find in airports, but it's less a liquor, tobacco, and although it is a beauty business, beauty products need to be more than just products on a shelf. The more immersive they can be. We've run in the last year, some incredible skincare experiences and workshops, and hosted 100 or 200 people as an event, whereas you would see in an airport or a department store, you would see one person on a makeup or skincare account having a one-to-one experience. People on ships like to have their journey enriched and it's part of the experience. And I think the hotel analogy is an interesting one, that if the ship itself is the destination and it's taking you to amazing places, whereas an airport you're transitioning through to get to your amazing place, your holiday, your destination. So I think the brands which have embraced that and have realised that are the ones you'll see now excelling, and we've had some phenomenal experiences over the last year or so. could give you one example of Dalmore Whiskey on Cunard, where Richard Patterson, the master distiller, hosted an event and brought on a huge collection of incredibly premium whiskies and hosted a seminar for a couple of hundred people explaining about how whiskey is made right the way through to the nuances, and at the end of that, selling a product for £10,000 isn't an issue, whereas I think to do that in a kind of traditional, if you like, and I don't mean to be disrespectful by that, but to do that in an airport is very challenging. You know, you can sell premium products, but to educate that sort of mass of premium targeted consumers is a phenomenal opportunity for the brands. It's great for us. It adds and enhances the cruise experience for the traveller, for the cruise line. So I think it's a mixture of Cannes and other events and us just opening our eyes and ears and looking, because cruise is still a much lesser known channel. So part of our job here this week, and the reason we come a little bit enforced to Cannes, is about educating about marine and cruise first, then about kind of Harding, and then about the specific cruise brands. But there's almost, the first point is getting people who, more often than not, have never been on ships themselves. So whereas I can't imagine that there's anybody in Cannes who's never been through an airport, I can imagine the majority of people who are here have never been on a cruise ship, and that's quite a different mindset.
Some wise words there in terms of what it takes for new brands to penetrate the channel. I'm sure they'll take those on board. Question 2, when it comes to sourcing those brands, and as I say, new brands to the industry, what is Harding's approach, and how do you balance listing interesting but perhaps lesser known products offering potential with higher margin sellers, existing sellers?
Okay, that's good as well. I mean, linked very much to the first question, but again, I would say don't be scared to approach kind of us or the cruise channel if you're a brand that offers something different, because, and I would say to start with, it's very hard to say park the commercials, because the reality is we're in a tough commercial environment, and you know the commercials are important, but that the start point should be, is it the most appropriate product for the guest? So we've conducted in the last year over 20,000 individual guest questionnaires. I think it is the biggest one, certainly I believe a retailer has completed, but asking guests what they want, what brands do they want. So our buyers, and we've got a pretty big buying team for the size of our business, because we bespoke by cruise line and by ship and by itinerary, we have a general kind of philosophy, or the mindset is no two ships or itineraries are the same, so no two ranges and propositions are the same, whereas I guess it's ideal from a ranging and a listing and a kind of product management perspective to have sort of an A range, a B range, a C range, and you pick and choose and you bolt them together. Ships really isn't like that. It's much more at the destination, the souvenir, the experience, the adding something from where you're going. So our buyers go a bit more far and wide. You know, I think the reason, little sales pitch on Harding, but the reason we've got an incredibly dynamic young team who, in the Frontier Awards last night, we had 5 people shortlisted for the Talent of Tomorrow, which I thought out 16 in the world of travel retail. I don't know how many people applied, but I thought it's a good sign that we've got some serious quality young talent that we, you know, encourage and empower and let them go out and find those products and bring them. And so half of their job almost is selling marine to brands, and half of it is kind of the brands who come to us, whereas in previous lives at bigger airport companies, those brands are more so coming to you and offering you almost the finished package, whereas so it's tougher on ships, and I think the reason it is quite a niche market is because you need that niche approach, and it's hard to do a one-size-fits-all if you want to be successful and if you want to have an individual proposition for each of the cruise brands, because they are different. I mentioned Cunard earlier. Virgin, as you know, are launching next year. Ritz-Carlton are coming, but every cruise brand you can think of out there, they are different. It's, you know, you wouldn't have the same offer in the Majestic Hotel across the road as an Ibis around the corner. If you could picture a shop in both of those, and you were inside that hotel for 7 or 8 days, you would expect quite different experiences, but you'd still want to be educated, entertained. Same principles apply, and then it's about the kind of the relative product that goes within that. So I think if the guests want it, you know, if you can tick all of those boxes, then you figure out and get the commercials kind of right at the end, rather than starting the other way around, because otherwise you end up with a bit more of a one-size-fits-all approach that that doesn't really add value and bring anything to the cruise line.
So very much park the commercials at the beginning.
I think part of the question,
Yeah.
it obviously needs to be, ships commercials and airport commercials. And we're in an industry where broadly everyone knows the kind of commercials. It's more challenging if you're going out to new brands, and you'll see in the coming year, particularly with some of the new brands, new cruise brands I've mentioned there, you'll see a lot of new brands coming to the cruise market, and that's much more of an education process with those brands, because the kind of margins that are required or commercials that are needed around it and the logistics around it can be a bit intimidating for people. But I just say, if it's the right product that the guests want, don't let the fear of the unknown stop you coming in the first place. Let's have the conversation, see is there a way we can make it work. And
Okay. Question 3, and perhaps somewhat of a curveball question: Brexit and the return of duty free between the UK and EU, potential return of duty free between the UK and EU. Blessing or a curse for Harding Retail?
blessing or curse, an interesting one. Between Boris Johnson and the Tony Blair speech, I thought was interesting the other morning. It's an interesting one because, looking at our actual numbers on it, the amount of ships that we have today that operate around in this part of the world that would be affected by the EU, non-EU status of Brexit is a fraction of a percent. So you'd say, well, from that perspective, it's not going to make any difference. But obviously it would open up potentially the whole cross-channel, whether it's UK, France, Ireland, the North Sea routes, a lot of those ferry business that really suffered under 1999 abolition, I guess potentially those could come back in force. It's slightly different, a ferry business to a cruise business. It's a more, fast turnaround of more kind of core products, and it's more price-based, and you've got guests maybe for a few hours rather than a number of days, so it's a slightly different model. It's an interesting one. Brexit, slightly more broad than just the cross-channel part, that most of our business today, revenue is in US dollars, and Brexit indirectly, directly has pushed the pound down versus the dollar. So actually it's been bizarrely a positive from a business impact, that a weaker pound means the dollars are worth more when they come back. But I guess the uncertainty is never great, because in any kind of uncertainty people tend to hold firm. So I don't know, I guess it depends. Are you an optimist or a pessimist in it? And you think an optimist would say, well, whatever happens, there's going to be an opportunity there, because if the cross-channel business comes back and it's ferries, well, we've got a business with a huge number of vastly experienced airport people, and it's kind of, is it perhaps closer to an airport model? But we also know how to work marine, which is very challenging, but we've got the experience to do that. So you'd sort of say, well, it's a perfect one for us to take an opportunity from, and all of the things I've said in the last couple of questions would apply, but you just have to trim the time down, because an airport where you have perhaps minutes to an hour, cruise ship you've got days, ferries maybe you've got hours to an hour, longer number of hours. So
Okay.
ever the optimist would say, there'll be an opportunity there some way or another, whether it happens, doesn't happen, quite what the impact is short or long term.
Okay. Next question. Where do you see the big frontier cruise markets?
So the US has been the dominant market for a long time, and it looks like it'll continue that way. I mentioned earlier, there are circa 120 ships under construction today, and that number is growing every day. Whenever I quote that number, it's out of date. Perhaps not even a year ago, I was talking about the 60 new ships coming to market, and we were at a presentation a few days later, and it had been updated, it's 67, and a few days later it was 75, and at last check 10 days ago it was about 120. But it's interesting where those ships are going. So today the Carnival Group, the Royal Caribbean Group, the NCL Group, and all of the other cruise brands, those first three make up over 80% of the cruise market. Less than 20% is in all of the others. We have quite a strong population in those others, whether it's Viking Line or Virgin or Ritz-Carlton as some examples. Marella, who are here with us this week. All of those new ships are coming out in sort of markets that you would think, well, that's not new. There are more ships coming out in America. There's super-sized coming out in the UK and Europe. The more interesting thing, I think, is that there's a diversification of the type of guests that are coming onto them. So Virgin will be very interesting because of, and I need to be careful about how much I would say on that, but Virgin is interesting because it's it's a very different proposition, similar itinerary, but done in a very different way with a different type of guest and a different proposition on board. And so I think there's an increasing diversification, and because it is in the world of holidays and travel, it's still such a small part of the business. The opportunity for it to grow and really continue to populate with new guests coming in is enormous. So whereas I think is a second runway coming to an airport and adding more population sort of, or are there, it was an interesting number the other day in the Tony Blair speech talking, I believe it was at 100 new airports coming in China in the next X, and talking about, so therefore is a second runway at Heathrow going to be really a big deal in the scheme of global climate, I guess. But I think cruise ships are becoming increasingly environmental, increasingly electric, lower emissions, because I think that is a challenge, and the plastics part of that. So I'm not sure there's a new frontier in terms of, well, suddenly that country is going to open up. China has a lot of capacity, India's been touched on, but the US being almost half the market is going to continue for the next few years certainly to be the dominant one, but the diversification within that I think is going to be what's interesting. So I just encourage anybody that hasn't, if you haven't been on a ship, saying kind of go on one is perhaps more challenging, but just a little bit of Googling of the different cruise lines and the adverts around them and how they're positioned, they really are different. It's as chalk and cheese as you could possibly get. And I think if you thought in hotel terms rather than, well, or what airport would you compare yourself to, or what, perhaps it's more about what airline, what hotel that, and then within that, really enhancing the experience for all of the guests in each of those markets, because the quality of the tonnage, the new ships that are coming out, the experience on board is getting better and better and better. So the competition for shops is not just, well, you have the guest kind of there as a captive audience. You do, but there's a hell of a lot else they could do as well. The dining experiences are better, the bars, the entertainment, everything is competing for that guest time. So you've got to keep yourself relevant.
You alluded to a hot topic at the moment, and that's sustainability. Final question is, how far is Harding Retail with plans for the reduction of plastic, such as the duty-free shopping bag? Do you support any specific ocean cleanup initiatives? And what else do you think the industry can and should be doing to adopt a more sustainable approach to business generally?
Genuinely, I was hoping this would come up about plastic, because it's one that as a business we're fanatical about, and I guess you can take the view that you're small and you follow, or you put a marker down because you're kind of small and innovative. You can lead the way, and you can kind of be the benchmark for things. So I love numbers, and we recently changed our plastic wrapping for pallets, because there is at the moment still, if anyone watching this knows of a solution, we'd love to hear it, but there's no solution to wrap pallets in a material that isn't plastic. But we've moved and invested in the tooling to wrap pallets in this super stretch wrap, which are, the plastic itself is 12 microns thick when it's stretched. A human hair is 75 microns, so it's crazily thin. And if you unwrapped, I guess most people could picture a pallet of product wrapped in plastic. If you pulled all the plastic down and crushed it, it would be the size of a marble. So it really is a phenomenal difference from where we were. All of our pallets now are made of recycled wood. There are no plastic pallets. Within the office, we only use, moving goods to the ships, we only use plastic returnable cartons. There's zero single use in the whole supply chain other than that super small now plastic wrap. Within the office, we've created, sounds perhaps a bit questionable, but it's called the Eco Squad. Fairly young, enthusiastic team, so they've organised themselves and really pushed us. So we have no more in the bathrooms. All of the materials are in industrial size, environmentally friendly. There's no single-use plastic. The cups have been removed from the machines. Everybody was given a plastic, hot and cold drinks cup. All of the plastic bins under the desk have gone. There's recycling stations in every area. I think the plastic bags have gone. They're just, that's an absolute no-brainer. It's one of those that once you realise, you kind of question yourself, how have we sort of ignored this for all the time? Particularly, I think plastic and oceans almost at the top of the list, because we've all seen the pictures of the animals and turtles, things wrapped, and it does really surprised me and really disappointed me, and still, I'm not going to name and shame this week, but I've seen a lot of new products here this week, and kind of disposable products. There are some chocolates I've seen this week that have vast amounts of plastic around them, and I guess you wonder, how was this in our industry where we should be leading as a travel retail industry? And I always think cruise within that should lead, and increasingly ships, as I touched on earlier, are electric or more environmentally, liquid gas fuels around it. But we should be leading, and so increasingly we're rejecting products that are, excessively wrapped, and encouraging brands. 2 conversations this morning I had, amazing product, but saying it's just too excessive on plastic, and they're talking about changing to a recycled glass brand I saw yesterday, who are just moving all of their toiletries and cosmetics are now in recycled plastic, and for marine will use recycled marine plastic for their packaging, and then another brand who will include a return envelope for the product at the end so you can send it back to get it recycled. You think that's pretty impressive. And as an industry, I guess we've got the challenge, and it was touched on greatly in the conference on Monday morning, we've got the challenge that in an industry of airports and rural flying, how do you balance that? Well, actually, there are ways that all of us, the suppliers, retailers, we can lead the way in all of those things. And some simple things we've done, the difference in it sounds a little bit basic, but the skips in our yard that used to have the plastic destroyed pallets, the wrap off the pallets as they come in, they'd be emptied every day and they'd be overflowing. It's now once a week, and it's half full, and it goes to a recycling centre. So the simple difference, small, doesn't cost any more. In fact, the bathroom and cleaning products we use in industrial sized packaging works out more cost effective, it's environmentally friendly, it's better on your hands, and your employees then see that, well, they're living and breathing it. So then, whether that's the buyers going and looking at products and having that in their mind, you think, if as an industry we really got behind it to that level, we could absolutely be at the forefront. And I think perhaps that would help to counteract the challenge of, as an industry, we're encouraging people to fly and to go on cruises, and whilst they're polluting things, the reality is, was touched on the other morning, that's not going to stop, and we don't want it to stop. We just want to do it in the most environmentally friendly, sustainable, etc. way we do. And the last point, we are going to do some beach clean-ups this year. I haven't done one yet, but they're on the agenda, and the office is in Bristol, so we've got a lot of shores around us, but I think it's walking the talk, isn't it? It's really getting stuck in yourself and showing that you're part of it.
As you've alluded to, taking small steps certainly can enact big changes in the future, whatever the size of the company, and we compel all companies and organisations in this industry to follow Harding's path in that regard. Thank you very much, James Prescott, for your comments. You've been watching Travel Retail Question Time.